Hello, Rose David, Director of NAP's Tribal Nations Initiative, Anishinaabe from Beausoleil First Nation in Ontario, Canada, but currently reside in Washington, D.C. Welcome back, and thank you for joining Native Americans in Philanthropy's member education sessions for today's discussion about Kānaka Maoli experiences in the philanthropy sector. If this is your first time joining us, the goal of these sessions is to share topics and issues that affect our communities from the perspective of those most impacted and provide an opportunity for the philanthropy sector to learn and to act. This month, as many of you know, is Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. What you may not know is that we at Native Americans in Philanthropy share an origin story with Asian Americans, Pacific Islanders in philanthropy, one of our closest partnerships that we hold near and dear. It is partnerships and friendships like this that make us proud to uplift the voices of our Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander friends and relatives, not only in this month, but every month. Today's discussion, Kānaka Maoli Experiences, focuses on the unique history of Native Hawaiians and the modern day effects of colonization by the United States. We are honored to share this space to address issues faced by the Kānaka Maoli relatives, the vital work being done to protect their land and culture, and how philanthropy can change to make funding more equitable. It is my pleasure to introduce today's moderator, President and CEO of Poston and Associates, Steph Poston. Welcome back, Steph.
Greetings, everybody. So great to be back here and being able to be with Native Americans in Philanthropy and all the supporters of the causes and the great initiatives that are out there. I'm coming to you live from the Pueblo of Sandia, a tribe immediately north of Albuquerque, New Mexico. And the weather here today in New Mexico is definitely teasing us with summer weather. So super excited to be here. We have an amazing lineup of panelists and guests and speakers, and we just look forward to being in conversation with you and hearing what our expert panelists have to say about this important topic. So with that, I will invite our first guest up to give a brief intro. And Ku'ule, if you can come to the stage, the virtual stage.
Aloha, my name is Ku'ule Nani Maunupau. I am the board president of Maui Mixer, a nonprofit organization on the island of Maui. I'm coming in from Waiahuli Homestead. We started out with a sunny morning and have a little bit of clouds right now, but it's always beautiful in Hawaii.
Great, welcome. Super excited to have you. And our next panelist is Kēhau, if we could have her come to the virtual stage.
Aloha, kahiaka kako. My name is Kēhau Meyer. I'm a program officer at the Hawaii Community Foundation in our Community Grants and Initiatives division. I also am a part of the arts and culture sector within our change framework, where we believe in shared goals, common data, and collective action to make a positive impact for Hawaii. And I've been at the foundation for about 4 years.
Thank you so much. And our next panelist is Lipoa, if we can have her come to the virtual stage.
Aloha mai kako, o Lipoa kahale wahi ko'inoa. My name is Lipoa kahale wahi. I grew up and work now in the community of Hana on the island of Maui. I'm actually tuning in from Austin, Texas. I jumped the pond, but it's overcast and nice here and has been treating us well. So mahalo nui for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Great. As you can see, we have an amazing lineup of panelists. And so I just want to remind the audience that we will take questions. So by all means, we have somebody moderating the chat and can help support us and making sure we get the audience questions answered, because that's such an important segment of this education series. So with that, I'm going to ask the first question. And the first question is, the Kingdom of Hawaii has a unique history, both culturally and legally, that many people don't understand. Can you share with us more about your personal history and how your culture and heritage inform the work that you are doing now? And I'll direct that question first to Lipoa.
Mahalo, Stephanie. Well, I mean, our heritage has everything to do with where I am today, but I'll share from my personal perspective as a wahine hapa of mixed ethnicities who identifies as Kānaka Maoli first and foremost. My father is Kānaka Maoli and Korean, my mother Caucasian, which is not uncommon, which is not an uncommon story these days. However, it does weave a particular narrative as one becomes and grows up and self-identifies. My father, coming from Hana, was so proud to be Hawaiian and from Hana. And so we grew up with that. Ai hanao ohia was something he commonly said. There's only one Hawaiian word in that phrase. The rest are quite pidgin, or our colloquial language, if you will. But yeah, I was born, that meant I am born and raised right here where I stand. And it oftentimes included a lot of hand gestures. And then my mother, who, she found her way to Hana via a sailboat on her own accord. Yet both of them wove a path for my siblings and I to seek, crave, and connect with our land, our aina, our food, and our ways of life. And by our, I mean Hawaiian, Kānaka Maoli ways of life. So very rooted to aina culture and heritage, but knowing, you're a part of these two worlds. As you learn about your history, colonization, militarization, you have this intimate perspective with this deeply rooted culture, genealogical ties directly to space, place, trees, sands, you name it, oceans, tides. And then you are a part of this makeup of, what we, of other, of they, of colonization. Not that my mom, came that way per se herself directly, but you have to navigate that as you grow up, learning more about your heritage, learning about the fights that both of your families, where your families were from, were a part of, and so that's definitely a part of one's makeup. And so that's written all over the work that I am now a part of. I was blessed to be the first in my ohana to go to college. Our mother instilled a value in education in all of us. And so we actually all went away. There are 3 of us. But I'd like to say that it was our dad that instilled in us and what he instilled in us that ended up bringing us home. And in Makahana Ka'ike, the organization that I'm a part of now, which is a melting pot of programs, activities, and services, I mean, this allows me to ground myself in our ways of life while being a part of the development of pathways for all of our youth, whether college bound, career bound, aina bound, other bound, to be a part of and to root ourselves and to grow. For A'ohe Pau Ka'ike Kahalau Ho'okahi, all knowledge is not taught in the same school. So that was a great question to start off with. Thank you, Steph.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I love the diversity within the diversity, right? And that's the beauty in all of it. So thank you for sharing. Same question, I will direct that to Ku'ule, and I can just offer a summary of the question. The Kingdom of Hawaii has a unique history, culturally and legally, that folks don't understand. And if you could share about your personal history and how your culture and heritage are a part of the work that you do.
Okay, thank you. So I was fortunate to be raised with the Maunupau family, who did provide, workshops in Hawaiian language, culture, and music. So we were culturally grounded, but I noticed even at a young age that none of my classmates that I went to school for. So definitely felt isolating And then, so I'm a lot older than the other panelists. So when I was growing up, the only type of Hawaiian history that was available was 7th grade, one semester of 7th grade Hawaiian history that did not discuss the illegal overthrow of Queen Liliuokalani. So it wasn't until I got out of the military, came home, and my sister invited me to a Hui na Au meeting. And that is when I learned at about the age of 21 about the illegal overthrow. So that was very frustrating. It brought so much anger. You feel like your country just lied to you your whole life, right? About this whole historical past. After that, I began volunteering at the Native Hawaiian Legal Corps, and I found out about Kahiki Nui. I'd lived on Maui at the time. So my first project was opposing the lease of Kahiki Nui, which was 15,000 acres on the backside of Maui, backside of Haleakala, that was being leased to a non-Hawaiian for $1 a year. And so working with Native Hawaiian Legal Corps, they asked me to do research on Kahiki Nui. We had to find historical significance of why it had to be returned to Native Hawaiians. So I'm at University of Hawaii, in my 20s, and I'm looking at the Pacific Island collection. And all of a sudden I find Kahiki Nui, C. Thomas Maunupau. That was my grandfather. And so it was so many emotions. I called my mom, so excited that suddenly I was, it's sentimental to me. Suddenly I was fighting a cause that my grandfather was connected to back in the 1920s when him and anthropologist Kenneth Emery went to Kaupo and Kahiki Nui to document stories of the area. So that led to Native Hawaiian Legal Corps invited me to help establish the Hawaiian Homelands Action Network with Uncle Sonny Kaniho and Hawaiian homestead rancher Ethel Andrade. They were trying to get Department of Hawaiian Homelands to put more Native Hawaiians onto the land. Hawaiian Homelands, where I live now, is similar to tribal lands. So we've been fighting for that for years. So in the mid-1990s, I was still young in my 20s. With all the work we were doing with NHLC and the Hawaiian Homelands Action Network, a Native American financial institution had invited me to meet with them. So I went to California. I was in LA. And in that one weekend, we were able to negotiate $187 million in Fannie Mae funds for Hawaiian homesteaders. Sadly, on my flight back home, by the time I landed in Hawaii, we had learned that Hawaiian Homelands told Fannie Mae, thank you, but no thank you. And within a few weeks, they had negotiated a partnership with a local bank, and the bank within a month had started advertising for Native Hawaiian homelands. So I think the question here when it comes to this, it's a deep question, why are these peoples in these decision-making positions making decisions at the detriment of Native Hawaiians? We can ask ourselves, $187 million back in the mid-90s would have housed over 1,000 Native Hawaiian families. And how would that have changed the landscape of Department of Hawaiian Homelands? How would it have changed the landscape for Native Hawaiian communities? And so I guess as Native Hawaiians, we're still in the question of how does federal and state government make decisions for us that hurt us and goes against our inherent sovereignty as Indigenous peoples? So it's a very good question, and it's still an issue that we need to address. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Wow. I'm that must have been a very difficult time to thinking you're leaving with good news and get the devastation and the blow of that. Wow. I could feel it over here. So that was a disappointment. The same question, Kēhau. What are some of the personal history and how your culture and heritage inform the work that you're doing?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, yes, it's such a powerful question, and I want to mahalo my co-presenters for just starting us off right on the a good place to start with our history centered. Really, I was lucky enough to attend a school that allowed me to study my history and language, but it wasn't until our senior year where we started actually learning about the overthrow, similar to Ku'ule's experience, where it was a little too late, it felt, And so by the time I was leaving to go to the continent for college, all I had to take with me was Olelo Hawaii, but not, 100% fluent. And even that, without practice, it kind of goes away, right? And so when I came home, I had the blessed opportunity to work with Native Hawaiian nonprofit communities doing advocacy work, beneficiary advocacy work, helping homestead communities, advocating at homestead meetings, and just listening to different concerns. And I would say that while I did have formal Hawaiian education, these Native Hawaiian serving nonprofit spaces taught me more about my community than I could ever imagine, right? And so the relationships that I built since that time, and even the lived experience I've had, just being able to listen to conversations and visit people's homes, those are the lived experiences I bring to philanthropy today, right? And it helps me, whether I do have knowledge of language and cultural practice, but by no means am I a cultural expert, but I can build the bridge to bring those voices here to, our philanthropic sector, and just being held accountable, because I have these deep relationships in community, and I know that they're watching, they're learning, they're listening, and they're counting on me to not drop this opportunity, right? To make the best of it, so that we can hold space for our culture, ensure that the voices are centered in spaces that maybe traditionally they have not been centered and historically have not been centered. And then, making sure that I can bring them into the fold in ways that make sense, right? Not just inviting people in to participate the way everybody else participates, but to make meaningful connections. And so, I think that my personal experiences, while they have not been familiarly rooted, right? I grew up in urban Honolulu and in Kailua at a time when my grandparents and parents really weren't deeply rooted in culture. But I was able to, in my mid-20s, to really immerse myself in a community that was able to fill in gaps that I just naturally didn't grow up around, because of the way that my community was either gentrified or those opportunities to learn were stripped away from my grandparents and my parents. So I wanted to just make sure that, I give homage to that community that really molded me and to the person I am today. So, and I bring that to my work every day.
Awesome. I think that's an important point to acknowledge. There's, all of us have many of us have lived in the urban setting at one point or another, but that we still have connection and responsibility to community is such a beautiful value. So thank you for sharing that. The next question is, when we see interest in funding community work in Hawaii, that desire is coupled with people wanting to visit the islands, but we also know that this can be complicated because of the overpopulation and additional harm to the people and land. So with that in mind, what does ethical funding of Hawaii look like from your perspective? And I'll direct that to Lipoa.
Mahalo again, Steph. The first thing that came to mind when I read that question was thinking about really long-term sustainable funding opportunities. I guess the first thing is actually disconnecting yourself with that trip to Hawaii. I think if you really build the relationships with our organizations, first, maybe our individuals like myself, I recognize, as a part of my role, I am the face of my organization, my teams. Oftentimes, I try, right? You try to push them up front, and some will, some won't. But building those relationships first, those invitations, those open doors, I promise you, will come. We recognize that our work truly speaks for itself. You come and you're going to see everything and how it works and how it's knit together. We do our best, of course, to write that on paper, share those narratives. And again, I think many of our organizations throughout Hawaii have done quite well to share those stories. But once we feel that trust, once we feel that investment, and truly feel it, not just see it in writing. We're with our history, I think we've become quite skeptical. good filters. It's trained us to have good eyes, I think, and to be able to see when things are truly authentic. But yeah, trust me when I say that those open doors will come. We will want to invite you because we recognize those. That our work truly does speak for itself when you see it, feel it, be a part of it. But and being open to those long-term sustainable funding opportunities, those relationship building, and being ready to transform your work as well. I think along with the vacation mindset, the coming in, is also like, okay, how can we make you sustainable? And then, because at some point we're gonna leave, right? I mean, we're gonna move on. We're gonna, but our organizations will continue to be here. And so, how can you create pathways, sure, to be able to move on, but giving us the skills, leveraging partnerships to be able to continue, and embracing those relationships in person again when they do come, those trips when they do come. Mahalo.
Great. Kēhau, same question. How can we have more connection when visiting Hawaii?
Yeah, and I think sometimes I came to this question with a bit of a philanthropic lens, right? I'm around a lot of charitable giving and that mindset of giving back, right? But I always think of ethical funding to Hawaii being intentional. It just has to be intentional, right? It has to be intentionally inclusive of our Indigenous knowledge and practices, and not just and maybe that means like being aware, or more than aware, being educated on who are these protectors of spaces and resources that we have here? How are we uplifting Indigenous solutions that are already doing addressing the issues, doing the job that needs to be done, right? A lot of people don't realize that our Indigenous knowledge practices are being adopted every day to address the issues that we are dealing with, whether it's clean water, land use rights, housing, education, employment. Ethical funding considers what programs are going to be the most impactful, what funding is going to be the most sustainable, and who in this community is making Hawaii, right? And as cliche as that does sound, like we have to always keep the core of our island community strong. And in my opinion, that's our Indigenous knowledge practices, right? Those people that are holding our practices and keeping them alive and moving them into the future, right? So this could look, in the philanthropic sense, like unrestricted funding, right? Dedicated to Indigenous community programming. And that's intentional. That's a decision you have to make to come and say, I will intentionally give to the areas that are going to make the most lasting impact on our community. And so when our practices are already being used for solution building, it only makes sense to strengthen the source of those solutions. And to me, that means investing heavily into Ike Hawaii. So that was kind of what I took out of this question of what ethical funding would look like.
Yeah, I love the fact that you brought up the unrestricted funding, right? Instead of this really rigid perspective, so that the folks on the ground can do the work that they need to do. So I appreciate that. Lipoa, same thing. What does ethical funding of Hawaii look like?
I think that was for me, Kule.
Yes, please.
Okay. So I addressed it as ethical funding as nonprofits in Hawaii and ethical funding as funders coming to Hawaii. So for ethical funding in Hawaii as a nonprofit, that's almost difficult to almost impossible, because in order to think about ethical funding, you have to consider the illegal overthrow of the Hawaiian nation and the subsequent illegal taking of lands and natural resources. So most of the Hawaii foundations over the last 100 years are either established by or have direct connections to the missionary families and American businessmen that illegally took Hawaiian homelands. So it's very difficult, because the foundations we have now, like the Hawaii Community Foundation, they have funded Native Hawaiian programs as long as I've, been applying for them, and for many years. So, it's very difficult. We do have places like Hawaii People's Fund. They definitely fund very revolutionary types of projects in Native Hawaiian communities. And there are new foundations springing up every day over the last 20 years. We have the wealthiest of the wealthy moving to Hawaii. We got the Google founder, Larry Ellison. We have the guy who invented Tetris. And some of them are forming foundations. And even though they don't support Native Hawaiians specifically, Native Hawaiian nonprofits do apply for them. So it is a very complicated issue in Hawaii. A recent ethical funding issue that came up was on Maui. So the Maui voters voted against Monsanto being on Maui in 2014, and it made global news. It was amazing that a whole island, a whole county had stood up and voted Monsanto out. But unfortunately, the mayor at that time was receiving monies from Monsanto and refused to obey the result of the vote. So nothing ever happened. That vote was never acknowledged or followed. So in Hawaii, Monsanto started giving out grant monies, and some nonprofits took it and some nonprofits didn't. And that is a big thing, because as a Native Hawaiian, I refuse to take funding from Monsanto because they're destroying our land and our resources, not only on Maui, but around the world. So it does get, definitely difficult. But for outside funders that do want to come in and fund Indigenous peoples, if you're coming to Hawaii, don't go to Waikiki, because that's not where the Native Hawaiians are. If we are there, we're usually cleaning your room and servicing you food. So if you truly want to come to Hawaii and help the Indigenous people, go to Waiahole. Visit the taro farmers that fought for water rights. Go to Waianae and check out Ka'ala Farms and Ma'o Organic Farms, providing cultural and educational farming support. Or if you're on Maui, go to Kēhau Bay and see the work they do with Ahupua'a stewardship practices, or the farmers in Kenai, or exactly like Lipoa's program in Hana. And we also have 14 Native Hawaiian charter schools throughout the state. So, your intention on coming to Hawaii is definitely seen through where you go and visit and where you put your resources in. So thank you for that question.
Yeah, that's a great observation on just being guests there and how the different areas we can visit to move the needle, even if it's in simple ways like that, is being intentional about the spaces we do visit when we do get the honor and privilege to be on the homelands there. So thank you for that thoughtful response. Appreciate it. I still want you to stay forward and answer this next question. And it's, under the current administration, we've seen a change in language with some government agencies to be more inclusive of Native Hawaiians and island communities. With that change comes new opportunity for the U.S. government to create broader support to Hawaiian peoples, potentially similar to how mainland tribal nations are supported. Given the unique history of Hawaii, can you share your thought of how this might be accomplished while still respecting the sovereignty of the peoples? Did we lose? Okay.
I'm still here, sorry.
Ku'ule, yeah.
Oh, you want me to? Okay. Thank you. Although this administration is supportive and of the Native Hawaiian peoples, that could suddenly change, and we've experienced that. So during the Clinton administration, he signed an apology bill that gave hope to Native Hawaiians that the U.S. was finally acknowledging the illegal overthrow and annexation of Hawaii. But unfortunately, the next administration would ignore any and all attempts of Native Hawaiians to simply be acknowledged as Indigenous peoples. So right now, Native Hawaiians, our current status with the state are wards of the state. And wards of the state are prisoners, foster children, and the severely mentally disabled and capacitated. That is the current status we hold. So, it's just frustrating. So Clinton, yes. Bush, no. Obama, yes. The Obama administration definitely supported the acknowledgement of Native Hawaiian rights, but then as soon as the next administration came in, they would block any attempts of Hawaiian sovereignty or even just the acknowledgement of us being indigenous. So US policies, they can be as volatile as the stock market, and we're unsure what is to come for our future, you know? So growing up, I was told I was Choctaw Indian on my dad's side, but he was an orphan, so I wasn't able to connect our genealogy, though I did prove it through my DNA. I have networked over the years with Native Americans from Alaska to Florida. And in all my years of working with Native Americans, not once did I ever hear a Native American say, hey, this tribal nation partnership with the US is great. And yeah, they support everything we do, you know, just the opposite. The US uses Congress's plenary powers, and that usurps tribal rights to mine uranium. They approved the Alaska pipeline despite protests from the tribe. And recently, just the Dakota Access Pipeline was approved. And so even though in 2020, the US courts shut down the Dakota pipeline, it was in relation to the environmental impact and had no relation to the tribal rights of the tribes around there. So this is the same in Hawaii, like Mauna Kea, our sacred mountain, the Haleakala fuel spill this year by the military, the Red Leak fuel spill by the military from 2014 to 22, and the military occupation of the sacred area of Pohakuloa on Hawaii Island. So for Natives, I do not look at the tribal nation status as something, you know, we want. For Hawaiians, I hope that we can develop a different model that removes Congress's plenary powers and allows our people and our nation to make decisions for our own. And I think we can learn from the Constitution of Palau in 1981, which had amendments in 1992, which is a compact of free association in partnership with the US, in which they remain their independent and sovereign nation. So I think as Hawaiians, we definitely would want to look into that model. And even for tribal nations, you know, negotiate a new pact, remove Congress's plenary powers, you know. So thank you for that question.
Yeah, some really great insight, and looking at lessons learned is oftentimes underrated. So I appreciate you bringing forth that. Same question, Lipoa, like, given the unique history of Hawaii, can you share your thoughts of how we can continue still respecting the sovereignty of the peoples there?
Mahalo, Stephanie. I mean, thank you for starting off with ku'ule, because I'm a spring chicken in comparison, a spring nene, maybe, no, in comparison to my fellow panelists. I mean, I've only been involved in the nonprofit space for about 6 years, and then 3 years going on 4 in my role here. So, you know, I recognize that actually what was turning around in my head is quite small in scope. And so I appreciate you being able to, start with ku'ule and being able to tap into her knowledge and expertise to kind of lay the foundation for us with that question. Because again, my approach in seeing it and kind of moving it around in my mind was purely, you know, having some experience and learning and growing within the funding opportunities that are provided, you know, to Native Americans and, you know, Asians, Pacific Islanders, right? We're all kind of like summed in that space into the same line. And so how then, you know, how cool maybe would it be to be able to separate us and for Native Hawaiians to have, you know, and other cultures and ethnicities within the great nation of the United States, you know, to have the different check boxes that we can check, and then funding that would be directed, you know, to us, to our nations, to our tribes, to our peoples, specifically. So that's what I was thinking about. And so how cool would that be? How rewarding potentially. But then from there, right, what would access look like to these systems for Native Hawaiians? What would the application processes look like? Again, many of us have been able to figure it out, right, to access those funds, draw down those funds from the the federal government through things like the associations for Native Americans and others, right, who have access to these funds. But it's not an easy process. It's not an easy application. Many of our nonprofit organizations, like Kēhau referenced, right, are on the ground, are preserving this Ike Hawaii, these cultural practices, this cultural ancestral knowledge very intimately. And so who has extra funding for a grant writer, let alone, a funds development person to strategize? So yeah, what would access look like to be able to even tap into these funds if they were made specifically for Native Hawaiians? And then, are there organizations, and who would it be, like a Hawaii Community Foundation or other, who might be that bridge, right? Be able to capture those funds and then, throw the net out wide throughout Hawaii to distribute them. And then from there too, I kind of was playing with the idea of, even though, Native Hawaiians span 8, there's 8 main Hawaiian islands with, but there's over 100 that span out, through the Northwest. Our communities are all quite different, and Kēhau, has navigated this quite well, and many of her colleagues, right, to be able to identify, bring together, and recognize the differences from community to community. How could we honor that in some way, respect that in some way? How could my community of Hana, be recognized for its different personalities, characteristics, practices from another community, even similar of a similar makeup on Big Island or Kauai or Oahu, because we're all quite different. We retain different practices differently. Sometimes even the way we speak is different. And so being able to recognize this moku or district specific, these different characteristics, ahupua'a, right, the division, the land division from mountain to sea that we still hold on to these days within Hawaii. How could we recognize that somehow? Because we're not all the same. We have many similarities. We are one people, but we've been able to retain different knowledge differently. And so could that be woven in some way?
Yeah, I really like the way that you've weaved in your perspective. So I'm now interested to hear from Kēhau. What is your perspective on that, and how we might still respect the sovereignty of the peoples?
Yeah, I think Ku'ule and Lipua really teed up the context for why, contingent upon the unique history of Hawaii, you see a spectrum of engagement, right, with the federal government, with administrations. And within our community, certainly it looks different from one person to the next. And the option to partner and participate with the administration through a variety of programs that we're included in is a great option, right? You can take it or you don't have to. And what I think, though, as we are being included in these funding opportunities, in policy, policy writing, inclusive language is always going to be helpful, but making sure that Kānaka Maoli are a part of those conversations, that they are understood and responsive, to the things that are coming out of community. I think having, the Office of Native Hawaiian Relations within the DOI is a good step, right? It's a great inclusive solution to making sure that the language is accurate. But I think beyond federal funding, it's a community to community decision to engage at whatever is comfortable, right? And that's a conscious decision that a lot of people make. So when our issues are so broad reaching from island to island, the relationships with each of those agencies is gonna vary. But I think the one thing that we'll probably need is just an understanding that our community setup, the way that we are organized, is just so different from any other tribal community. And there has to be some understanding that it's going to take probably a little bit more effort because of the impacts our history has made on how we as a community get to communicate with each other, get to work together, right? And creating a space of competition versus abundance has contributed to that, right? So I think what it comes down to, the respect of, the sovereignty of Kānaka Maoli people, means understanding that our approaches are all going to be different. And that should be okay. We should never be boxed into one channel, one process, one way. And yeah, so I will defer if anyone wanted to kind of expand on that. Any of my colleagues?
Yes, by all means. Lepoi wanted to expand on that. Yes, please chime in.
Oh, just a brief agreement of, yeah, it's not going to be a copy and paste, right? It's not going to be, okay, this worked for, this broad blanket of Native American communities. Okay, let's just, copy and paste it to other Indigenous peoples. Yeah, that's all I wanted to chime in on.
Yeah, I think I can appreciate like the whole recognizing the different structure and organization of the Hawaiian communities and having respect for that, and not continuing to push the narrative of scarcity and come from the narrative of abundance is really important. So the next question is, when we talk about changing access to funding, especially when all Indigenous voices are not represented, it can sometimes feel like we have to compete for the resources available. In your experience, what are some of the challenges you faced with accessing funds from philanthropic institutions, and how can they be changed to better support equitable access? And I will start with Ku'ule.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, Hawaii is a very small pool, and we are all competing against the same resources. So most of the grants have grants ranging from 5,000 to just under 100,000, with usually 1 to 2 year term limits. And they do benefit Native Hawaiian communities. So before I go critiquing the foundations, I definitely want to simply appreciate what Hawaii Community Foundation, Hawaii People's Fund, Council for Native Hawaiian Advancement, and all those organizations are currently doing to help Native Hawaiian communities. But after speaking with executive directors, I work at Kēhau, and I had come across an executive director at a foundation meeting, and we were going through our own financials, when large federal grants run out and you're waiting on the next grant. And so this executive director who's running this, over 20-year successful nonprofit for Native Hawaiian education, as I'm telling her, hey, yeah, we're kind of in tight times. She goes, yeah, last October, I really thought we were going to have to shut our doors because the funding ran out. And then at the last minute, it came in. But what that does is that the stress as an executive director of constantly raising funds for your staff, and it puts stress on the staff too. So we have to come up with better ways of addressing it, because right now, currently, suicide and addiction rates are climbing in nonprofits, and it is more important than ever to create a stable and healthy work environment that supports its staff and its community. So currently, as a nonprofit, nonprofits normally will take about 11 to 15% for admin, and businesses take 28%. So we need to treat our staff well and start requesting 28% for admin, and funders should also consider, the administrative costs, that it takes to implement these amazing programs. So thank you so much for that question.
Yeah, absolutely. And if Lipoa, if you can take on that question as well.
Sure. Again, mahalo ku'ule for laying down the foundation for us. Also very grateful to the foundation's donations, donors, funders from all over that, are building intentional giving are seeking, to have our listen and to have our voices heard, uplift our voices. Again, as boots on the ground. I know that's not a great phrase to say these days, but things popped up in my mind like reporting. Like, can we can we loosen the guidelines around reporting and reporting frequency? But also to kind of, I think, connect to Ku'ule's point is we are a small community. Hawaii is small, is a small community. And to speak from Hana, we are a small community and within that. And so there's this constant race and this constant pressure, right, to scale up, right? Funders, foundations want to see, okay, how are you going to expand? How are you going to grow? How are you going to become sustainable? And that's really difficult for our communities throughout Hawaii, but then in our rural communities like Hana, where I can't just go to the next neighborhood and serve that population. It may not even be my place to serve that population. And that's how we operate. And so who am I to say that the solutions that work within my community are going to work just a neighborhood away? And again, Hana, we have a 4-hour round trip drive to get to the next neighborhood, if you will. And that's not a freeway, that's a windy, narrow road threatened by landslides, flooding, road collapse, overwhelming amounts of tourists. So, that's a huge feat for us and almost nearly impossible. Can we partner? Of course, right? Can we work with others in their communities to share what we do, exchange what we do, learn and grow together? Of course. But that idea of scaling up, expanding our reach is not always a realistic goal, nor a model of success for our rural communities. So that's what I would want to share regarding trying to better support equitable access.
Yeah, I think that whole thing, there's always a big push to think about sustainability and how you're going to grow, but just thinking about where you stand now and how you can strengthen where you stand now is an important point to make. And I want to also direct the question to, how the same question is, how can philanthropy be changed to better support equitable access?
Yeah. I mean, I'm going to be the first one to say that they're being very kind, but we've had transparent conversations, and all of my grantees know that I am very open about my experience in philanthropy. I was at a Native Hawaiian nonprofit for a long time, and then I transitioned into the funder role about 5 or 6 years into that career, right? And so bringing that, I do what I can to change from my end of that relationship, right? Some of the things that we do is simplifying questions, right? I am notorious for going in and saying, do we need to ask this? Right? How do we use this in the review? How is this a measure of impact or success, right? And how does it help to tell the story, right? And so I think we can always do better. I will be also the first one to say we've made progress. Lipoa and I have been in relationship since she transitioned into her leadership role. Thankfully, I was there at that time. So we have this trust that was built over many, many years, and I don't take that lightly. But what I am able to do is then to say, hey, tell me what you like or don't like about how I'm managing this grant program, right? And it has transformed. Obviously, the levers of how strict, we have to be with certain elements is dependent on who the funder is. There are some things at the community foundation that are just either legally bound or funder bound, right? We don't have our own blank check to spend as we wish. We have to go based on how a contract was signed however many years ago. And that's really, really hard. But we can bring solutions forward. I have started to adjust the way I do reporting, right? I don't dangle 5% at the end I've seen people do in the past. I want to give at some point everything up front, right? To make sure that we say, I trust you're going to do what you said you're going to do. But that takes time within an institution that has to manage risk as well, right? Has to manage risk and expectations. And so the things I can do is make the experience applying, being in the grant period, more easier to manage, one, right? So I like to stay out of Lipoa's hair. I like to say, I'm not gonna breathe down your neck. You have a problem, come talk to me, right? You need me to help you with something, I got you. But at the end of the day, like, the whole full experience is something I empathize with, because I used to be the grant writer, right? I used to be the program person, and bringing that lens to my end, I understand now, like, technology is a barrier for our rural and remote communities, right? Writing, we cannot judge people based on the quality of their writing, because not everyone has access to a grant writer, right? We have to judge them by the quality of the program and the story they're telling. And sometimes, if that means calling and having a conversation to kind of understand better, then maybe that's something we should consider, right? But I really want to make sure that the trust-based philanthropy that we're bringing in, not just like the national platform of trust-based philanthropy is adopted, but like a unique Hawaii lens of trust-based philanthropy, which is considering all the elements, right? Do you even have access to a laptop? Some of our best and oldest nonprofits have a crisis right now of nonprofit leadership who cannot take the turn with us into new technologies. And that was something that we learned in the pandemic when everything went virtual. How do we help our organizations have succession plans where young people can come in and help do that, so that the founding director doesn't have to figure out my new grants portal, right? That they have a next generation person that can do that for them, right? I don't want to place burden on organizations, but I also want to be a part of solutions if I can't get around the institutional burden. So there's a lot more we can do.
Yeah.
And I think that experience of removing some of the hoops, breaking down some of those barriers is really what I've been trying to do with the limitations I have within the unique setup of a community foundation.
Yeah, wow. Lots of great nuggets and shares there that people can really take to heart and implement, especially the part about making sure we're really looking closely at the power of the story that they have to share versus the writing piece. I think as a former tribal planner, I can totally relate to that. So that was lots of great nuggets there. Thank you for that. I want to make sure that we are paying attention to our audience questions. We have a couple that have come in, and we had an audience question that is inquiring about how we might influence regarding federal funding, how we might influence policy revisions. And Kule, if you want to speak to that a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I do want to say that Native Americans in Philanthropy is doing an amazing, amazing job in working directly with the U.S. government and including Indigenous peoples into federal funding, and even making specifically Indigenous funding. So I am, really appreciate the work that Native Americans in Philanthropy is doing that. And then we have an organization here called KUA, and they work with our coastal communities, Native Hawaiian communities, and they're also working with the state and globally, internationally and nationally, to make policy revisions to focus on supporting Native Hawaiian communities. So KUA and Native Americans in Philanthropy, thank you so much for the work you're doing in that area.
Do any of the other panelists want to try? Go ahead.
I do. Yeah, I just wanted to build on that. What we're trying to do at the foundation now within our department is doing community power building. And part of that is ensuring that we can fund organizations who are perfectly situated for those advocacy roles and push them forward. We definitely don't ever want to be the point we want to uplift and push the voices out, right? And so KUA was an excellent example. And I think there's a lot of organizations like CNHA and the Homestead Associations who go deep with policy advocacy, and they get all the way up to the federal level, you know, the state level, even at the city, right? Even in their neighborhood board level. So there are ways to do that where, and we're trying to figure out how to fund that, right? We have to find the right funders that will allow us the flexibility to do that. But I think, you know, I just want to double on Ku'ule's
Thank you.
commentary, because that is so important. The community knows best, and we just have to amplify those opportunities.
Yeah.
Yes, community does know what they need, and it's important to really respond to what the community is asking for. That's so important. And another community question along those same lines, or an audience question, is how does the ways that funders pose questions, solutions, or project project their worldview limit the potential of your work? So how do funders put questions, solutions, or projects that limit the potential of your work? Who wants to go ahead?
Okay. So in Hawaii, of course, I'm referring to Hawaii. The limitations in Hawaii, I would say, are more towards inherent sovereign rights. So you will not see grants available for Kuleana families to get their lands back, for quiet land title, to stop actually the quiet land title of homeowners taking over indigenous lands. And you will not, absolutely not, see any funding for Hawaiian sovereignty. So funders are very focused on the Hawaiian culture, education, and socio-economic. But when it comes to our inherent sovereign rights and funding those, that is completely neglected in Hawaii.
Thank you. Did any of the other panelists want to add to that?
Yeah, I think tied to that, I think there is a history of, you know, in philanthropy, there's power in being able to give your own money. And so I think if we can find a way to build, you know, a funding pot that belongs to the community, from the community, you can take that funder position and put it into the hands of community, right? So dreaming big, like thinking about ways that if current funders don't offer these solutions, then how do we build a tool that would allow the community to take that position, right? Because again, if we're going to wait for some millionaire or billionaire to come start a fund, it is very unlikely, like Ku'ule said, that they're going to align with those areas of our community issues and concerns. But I think that we have to maybe rethink how community engages with philanthropy as they build their own power and their own thought process around how money can be used as a tool for them as well, and not just the historical privilege that money gives a lot of other people in the space.
Yeah. No, thank you. And thank you, audience. Keep the questions coming. We're moderating, and lots of great questions in there. I'm going to go to the next question, and this is directed at Kēhau. Can you share with us a little more about the grant process at the HCF and how you work differently to better support the success of the grantees?
Yeah. You know, I think the Hawaii Community Foundation has a unique function in Hawaii because we manage hundreds and hundreds of funds for different purposes, right? And our grant making is really an arm for funder clients who not only have varied interests, but they have varied ways of getting their funds out. So my department, we mostly create funding opportunities, which normally are called RFPs, or requests for proposals, to distribute the grant dollars that are, you know, we are asked to do that on behalf of our clientele. This might be a donor advised fund, advisory committee. Sometimes it looks like a contract, and like the Hawaii Tourism Authority, correct? Like that's a contract with the state, and then we distribute funds according to what they tell us they want us to do. But the interesting thing about like some of these relationships is I view trust-based philanthropy both with nonprofits and funders. So I've been really working on my relationship with the Hawaii Tourism Authority. Full transparency, I worked there for a few years and got to help build the programs in-house. Unfortunately, after I left and came to the Community Foundation, they weren't able to maintain staff because of the pandemic, and they brought the programming to the Hawaii Community Foundation. But what the blessing was with that is I got to operate these programs without the built-in restrictions of a state management process, right? Which involves a lot of steps and contracts and signatures and delays. But I've been given the flexibility to operate it in a way that can be simplified because HTA trusts me, right? And I think as we think about our relationship building trust with our funders might help us to adjust the way that we can then give out money in the future, right? So I think about, this notion of gatekeeping or elitism that has come out, of the perception of HCF. And maybe historically it could have been there. But while I'm at this foundation, I want to make sure that we're centering community voices and we're educating our partners and clients and donors with what we're learning, right? The organization has been around for over 100 years, and I'm so happy to be a part of some of the bigger changes, right? And fully acknowledging the history of the organization and the areas that we are really expanding and growing on. So with programs like our change framework, we're able to look at the full spectrum of our sectors, right? We're able to build our trust-based philanthropy into that and then bring donors along through education, through conversation, through trusting relationships with our nonprofits, to build open and constant conversations. A lot of it is still being built. We are trying our best to take HCF into the future, and our community is coming with us, shoulder to shoulder, right? Sharing that power, hopefully getting to a place where unrestricted multi-year is the name of the game, is how we always do it. And as someone who gives consideration to all the stressors that impact our nonprofits, that is my personal dream, right? Is to see us being able to transform HCF with the community. And I don't think that necessarily is a practice that has always been adopted across philanthropy. And we'll see our private foundations taking those turns first because they have the levity and flexibility to do that. But I do think with the leadership we have now, with the staff we have now, I hope our nonprofit community feels that they can walk through our doors, hold hands with us when they need to, tell us the truth when they need to, and then help us push the community forward, because the work's already being done. It's just a matter of adding, to that momentum.
Yeah. Wow. Bravo for doing it different. It's amazing. So on the other end of it, so Lipoa, if you can tell us about your experience as a grantee and how working with the Hawaii Community Foundation has been different than past experiences in philanthropy.
Sure. Mahalo. Again, I haven't been within the nonprofit sector for a long time. I was in education before this. And so I think it could be valuable to be able to speak to what was it like in the early stages of Makahana Ka'ike, building that relationship with Hawaii Community Foundation. But I can't, I've shared some stories or heard, things from our previous executive director. Mainly positive, but I can't directly speak to that evolution. All I can share is, building off of what Kēhau mentioned earlier, it's been extremely positive for me and my team. We've been able to, I think, connect. Again, the program officers, taking Kēhau's experience, many of them, if not all, but many of them have direct experience with working in their community, working in programs in their community, and learning and growing in that space before growing into their roles in Hawaii Community Foundation. Again, our communities are all quite different, especially from island to island, but also on our islands. But they're able to at least have this context, this foundation, this common foundation to know that I don't have all the answers when I'm, like they're not coming in with all the answers into our community saying, this is what you need to do. Granted, again, a large foundation such as that will direct funding, in specific, dedicated to specific topics, subjects, issues, etc., our way. But they've been able to learn about their grantees, learn about the scope of services that we're providing to our communities, and so intimately be able to funnel, I think, opportunities our way, depending on those funds. Right off the bat, I mean, going back to like the visiting aspect, I mean, I remember, fond site visits, for example, being able to, again, invite people in, invite program officers in, to our community to share not only what we wrote on paper, but to show, really everything, and not shy away from the storage space that's all chaotic and overflowing, and really to be able to show that honest picture, show how programs flow from one to the next, show how things overlap in some places, and then move on to the next, and to really be able to paint that big picture. I mean, the one that's coming to mind in particular, I think the last one that Kēhau visited, with members of HTA2. I mean, we were going right into the valley where we do lo'i restoration, and it's pretty far back into one of our valleys. And here we have, a visiting family of 8 traipsing through these canals, or irrigation systems, or awai, trying to look for the waterfall off in the back of the valley, where like many of us, I mean, only our crew to maintain the waterway go back there, or obviously members of the community that know how to get there. And it's quite overgrown. And you have like this real life scenario with your funder, with your, like, and in that way, it was almost positive. It's like, this is what we're talking about. This is the issues that we're not always maybe writing about, but like, this is what we're also dealing with while trying to serve our communities in this way. And maybe to back up a step, I mean, having visitors back there, it's a huge danger to themselves primarily. Rescue, we've had tons of rescues in our area, around what essentially starts off as trespassing, but following an adventure and the desire for an experience. But, I think those, like, being, again, ready and able to really get dirty with us, and then take the feedback or ideas that we have, and mold and shift. And of course, like all of us, I mean, it doesn't happen overnight, but we've been able to experience change, adaptation, in partnership with Kēhau and her team, that really speaks to many of our programs, and especially the partnerships, where we do partner, around funding and projects and activities.
Yeah, no, great. Thanks for like just hearing it live and in person, from the funder to the grantee, and what that experience is like, and just to hear the nuances and the differences, and making that progress to make it accessible and equitable is a really powerful story to share on this platform. So thank you. Ku'ulei, you've been working in these spaces for 2 decades now, both on the public and private side. Now you're developing the first Native Hawaiians in Philanthropy project. Can you share more about what led you to take this on, why it's important, and how funders can help support this work?
Yes, thank you. So I actually attended the Power in Solidarity conference that was put together by Native Americans in Philanthropy and Asian American and Pacific Islanders in Philanthropy. So up there, I was able to connect with Native Hawaiians and Native Americans, including Executive Director Makalika Naholova'a of the Native Hawaiian Legal Corps, and she is now proudly the president of the National Native American Bar Association. So we're very proud of her. But during the conference, I attended a panel discussion with Sue Van of the Wallace Coulter Foundation. And she had some interesting insights as the CEO of the foundation and also as an Asian American. And she makes a lot of investments into Asian American and Pacific Islander communities for civic engagement. So what was interesting is she explained that she will not fund Asian Americans. She will fund Asian Americans in the US continent, however, not in Hawaii due to their improved status. And so that's interesting because only in Hawaii would you know that. So it told me that Sue Van did her research on the history, and it made me think of Candice Fujikane's book, The Asian Settler Colonialism. So in referring to that, Asians in Hawaii and Asians in the US have definitely different experiences. So I think for me, one, for a CEO of a foundation, do your research, just like Sue Van did, So throughout the conference, we continued to meet with Native Hawaiians and Native Americans, and we just decided, hey, when we get back home, we have to meet up because, we need to look at Native Hawaiians in philanthropy. So I invited Pualani Enos of Kaulia Creates because of her legal background and her knowledge of nonprofits, and we continued to meet. We began researching Native Hawaiian organizations, their leaders. We researched the philanthropy section in Hawaii because what we didn't want to do is recreate the wheel, right? We're all busy. We all have our own projects. So we didn't want to create something that was already in existence. So Hawaii Community Foundation provides so much funding and organizations. Hawaii People's Fund provides a revolutionary, radical. They'll fund things that most funders won't fund. And so we had those, and we didn't want to compete against them or provide something that they were already providing. So after spending time with the executive directors, we realized how hard it is to manage their nonprofit. So 50% of the time of executive directors are spent on fundraising. And I believe in Hawaii, these statistics are more. During COVID-19, nonprofits lost 900,000 jobs, and more than 1/3 of nonprofits were in financial jeopardy of closing their doors. 80% of fundraisers, which are normally the executive directors and grant writers, surveyed are satisfied with their jobs. However, 50% will leave the job within 2 years, and only 26% will return to fundraising. 84% of fundraisers feel tremendous stress, and more than 55% felt underappreciated, which contributes to the high rate of staff leaving that position. So as a fundraiser and grant writer, I can tell you, when you're getting grants, everybody loves you, right? You are like just the top. But when it's struggling and times are hard, suddenly they're looking at you like, why aren't you doing your job? How come we're not getting grants? And it has nothing to do with your proposal, right? It really doesn't. I mean, of course, writing a good quality proposal is a must, but there are so much competition now. And since the US government opened up nonprofit funding to churches about 20 years ago, that has drastically dropped towards community. So 50% of executive director time spent on securing fund. Grant reporting and fiscal management can be the most difficult part of the grant, which is not necessary. Grant reporting requirements change from grant to grant and year to year. So if you have 8 grant funders that you use, because nobody can work off of one funder, right? You have 8 different types of reporting, 8 different types of management, 8 different requirements, 8 different KPIs, so it's just so much. And then the accounting and bookkeeping can be so overwhelming. So what happens, and this has happened to several friends of mine in the nonprofit world, right? We're so overwhelmed with the finances. So we find somebody who comes in and they seemingly have so much financial knowledge. We hand over our books to them, and soon funds are embezzled. So this is definitely a common practice in nonprofits as far as embezzlement of funds, more common than it should be. And then, of course, as I mentioned earlier, there's no funding for inherent sovereign rights or kuleana lands. So in developing the Native Hawaiians in philanthropy, we worked hard to address those main concerns and stressors that executives, directors face daily. So we're developing programs that provide 5 to 10 year types of long-term funding. And we're creating a system where a grant manager is attached to the grant. So instead of putting the burden of grant management on the nonprofit, we're creating a system that assigns a grant manager, and that manager will do all the purchasing, will handle work with the staff directly to get all the statistics to help put together the reports. And that eliminates that burden, because when you give a grant to a nonprofit, you're saying, here's the fund for your project, but there's also about a $50,000 burden of administrative costs that come with the reporting. So in Native Hawaiian philanthropy, we are trying to create a more efficient way and long-term way to fund successful Native Hawaiian projects that are fiscally responsible. So we've partnered with 14 Native Hawaiian organizations, all have amazing Native Hawaiian programs that are culturally grounded, with a Native Hawaiian board. It is led by Native Hawaiians. And we are excited to be working with these organizations and to help create a fund that will, fund them for 10 years. So first 5 years, of course, and do a check, make sure everything's going okay. Does the system need to be improved? Does it need to be changed in any way? And then the next 10 years. And then, of course, there are some organizations that, like education will never find a way to be sustainable because it's education and it should be free. And so for those, after the 10-year mark, we do want to create an option of them becoming lifelong, just perpetual funding until the Hawaiian nation is created, and then we can hand it over to them. So thank you for that question.
Yeah. Thank you. I believe you referred to when you heard from the Sue Van conversation. So I know that our moderators are going to put that in the chat, and it's available on YouTube. So they're sharing that right now. I'd like to ask the final question, and we always like to have something that calls people to action or gives something to people can actually take action and walk away and do something to make a difference. So if you could encourage funders to change one thing right now that would make funding more equitable for your people, what would that one thing be? And I'll start with Lipoa.
Mahalo. I mean, really, I think to build off of what Ku'ule shared, the thing that came to my mind is more unrestricted funding opportunities, providing us or funding, and supporting general operating costs. We have all these programs over here, beautiful, and then we're not able to, support the administrative capacity to do the financials, well, and not be ripping our hair out. The reporting, and the leading, and all of those things. So that was my one idea. If I had to pick one and encourage more, would be those.
Great. Now, what's one thing?
So one thing, I have so many things, but if I had to say one thing, I would encourage funders to consider solutions or tools in their organizations or even in their giving that is flexible for the organization that's distributing your funds, right? So as someone who has to take funding under the direction of a funder, more flexibility and less restriction of those funds would just be incredible, right? If I could create a tool that doesn't exist yet at the foundation, it would be one that could collect funding that we could direct into our Indigenous communities in a way that is just purely relationship based, right? That doesn't have all the formal restrictions that we see today, and that we can try something different and unique for our different and unique community, right? And so if you want to be that funder, you could, and I'm thinking giving $5 to $5 billion, whoever you are in between that spectrum, just consider how you're giving money and if that has like ripple effects down the line on the impacts of the nonprofits that are going to be receiving it. Because as the middle person, it is really hard to see nonprofits struggle. It's hard to not have the answers, right? The only response to that is transparency and then responsiveness, right? Making sure that when we have the opportunity to make that change with our funders, that we are asking for that change. So that, I think that's one thing. It's probably a billion things tucked in there, though.
That's very good. Yes, there are a few things. That's awesome, though. Kule, what's something that can be done?
So yeah, I'll go back to my Suvan, suggestion. Do your research, meet the people, meet the community. Make sure it's not just a pretty brown face on a website. Make sure it is community-based, culturally grounded, place-based organizations and businesses that promote and perpetuate traditional Hawaiian practices and rights. What I was able to witness, about 20 years ago, suddenly all this funding became available to Native Hawaiians. And companies and businesses that did not want to work with Native Hawaiian communities before suddenly were applying for them, And so their interest in it is more financial than it is with the heart. And those aren't the kind of people that we want working in our Hawaiian community. They're not grassroots, they're not community based. So yeah, I would just, just like Suvan said, do your research.
Thank you. Yeah, that's such a simple one. Great.
Yeah.
So I want to take one more audience question here. And how would all suggest, and pardon if I don't get the pronunciation right, Kānaka who are a part of the diaspora and didn't grow up with their aina, support learning and protecting our culture? So whoever wants to step up and take that question, that'd be great.
I can start. I think, if you want, there's several ways to give back, and it's not always going to look like money, right? Sometimes it's being a key volunteer. I know a lot of nonprofit organizations who don't have time to do their own storytelling, to share their good work. And if you happen to be good at social media, ask a nonprofit if you can support them, right? Ask them if you can volunteer your time and your talents. But if you do, if all you have available because you are part of diaspora on the continent, then find a nonprofit that aligns with your personal mission, right, or your personal passions, and support their mission and just donate. If I had the tool to collect funding to do that, to gather all of the passionate, donations from our 500,000 Kānaka on the continent, I would love to have that, to have a tool for you to use that can go back out into community. It doesn't exist yet, and that's partially, part of the future that we could build, right? But I think the easiest and earliest thing is find something you're good at and offer your skill set. And if you don't have a skill set that you think they could use, then I think sharing what you can is always appreciated.
Great. Does anybody, the other two panelists, want to chime into that?
No.
Okay, great. So the last thing is we want to make sure that we give the panelists, and thank you for taking the time to be here with us today. The audience is largely funders with opportunities to change philanthropy through partnerships with organizations like yours. What do you want them to leave with to have a better understanding of? And Lipoa?
Woohoo, okay. I just wanted to first share that I've, again, since my experience with Makahana Ka'ike, I have learned so much and have been so empowered by the many people, tribes, cultures, organizations, and even families that we've been connected with through things like cohorts. I mean, funders have done, in my experience, there have been amazing funders who've done a great intentional job of bringing many organizations together to learn, to exchange, to grow together, and to exchange knowledge, skills. And so that's one thing that I have appreciated. Granted, if you start to have so many funding opportunities and juggling all these grants and donations, right, you gotta, then pick and choose. I mean, if you are blessed with that experience, it can tend to be a lot. And I've taken the approach of, while I like connecting and networking and things, I mean, my kuleana is back home. My place to be, not just comfortable, but just to live and to thrive and to work, is to serve my direct community. And I like creating bridges elsewhere. But at the same time, I want to be more present at home than without. But that is one way that at the same time I have appreciated getting to build relationships with partners, right? To be able to get to this point where it's not just funder and fundee, it's we are partners in this work together. And oftentimes bringing us all together have created those opportunities to learn and grow together. And I think the thing that our organization is wrestling with is then building those sustainable models of practice like any other business is supposed to in this modern age. I mean, our organization works directly in education. So I really appreciate Ku'ule shedding light on that education, how do we make education, funding education, sustainable as a nonprofit? If we go away, nobody else is going to come in and step in to do what we do. I mean, no business is going to do that. Outside of our nonprofit. However, how do we build the practices around investments, and things of that nature that other businesses have been able to benefit from? How do we create those pathways to then be able to provide direct support, direct empowerment to not only our organizations, but to our communities? And many funders have that experience, have that expertise. Can we have some too? Teach us. Please.
Thank you. Kēhau, what do you want the funders to have a better understanding of?
Yeah, I really want to emphasize that our Kānaka Maoli community is special and holds kuleana for the very things that make the world really want to get to know Hawaii. And what Hawaii needs are funders and partners who trust the community, who are open to building a mechanism that operates within philanthropy or grant making from a place of abundance and not competition, and that really centers relationships. So I feel like the Kānaka Maoli community has purpose and value beyond just creating and sharing beautiful things from Hawaii. It has real solutions to real world problems, and built into this, our own history, we've been able to offer that. But it also has deep relationships to people in place. And so, while I'm at the Hawaii Community Foundation, I can only hope to carve out a space where the Community Foundation is a partner, a convener, a resource for the Kānaka Maoli experience in philanthropy. And that this could mean creating a philanthropic tool that doesn't exist yet, but I definitely think should. So hopefully we can have funders and partners not currently working in Hawaii be a part of that solution building on the philanthropy side, to support the good works already happening and already being led by the community.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Ku'ule, what do you want the funders to better understand?
So right now, they are current funders revolutionizing philanthropy for Indigenous communities, and that's the Christensen Fund, Native Voices Rising, Indian Collective. In Hawaii, we do have the Hawaii People's Fund. Those organizations definitely take revolutionizing philanthropy to its limit. So for Native Hawaiian philanthropy, we want to learn from these foundations and apply their approach, but to a longer, 5 to 10 year funding and grant support. And for funders, look at the board of directors. That's what I'm asking you to do. Look at the board of directors. Is it Native led? I look at Native Americans in philanthropy, Native Voices Rising. 20 years ago, I would not have seen a national nonprofit with all Native American leadership, board, and staff. It's incredible. It's definitely exciting, and exciting that as Native Hawaiians, we can move into this world. So please check out our website, and check out our 14 nonprofits. What we're trying to do is revolutionize the grant system, not just the funding, but the grant system management itself. So one example I can give of what we want to do aligns with, I want to say his name correct, Yvon Chouinard, the owner of Patagonia, and his book, let my people go surfing. So what I loved about his forward-thinking, revolutionizing business idea was he was very flexible with staff to miss work. If the surf was up, the shop was closed, go and surf. If the ski conditions were good, shop was closed, go and surf. You know, he even created daycare systems for his staff, and he allowed children to go to work with his parents at Patagonia. So it's these types of systems that are definitely grounded in Native values. So we're looking at revolutionizing the grant system management in philanthropy to make it more efficient and provide the nonprofit staff with the support and stability that they deserve. These types of proven approaches will help develop a working, healthy environment for the people that are caring for our Indigenous communities. You know, it is important for us to take care of the nonprofit executive directors and the staff. So thank you so much for your questions today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. No, I want to thank each of you for joining us today. I want to thank those who joined us virtually. The questions that were asked, very thoughtful. We're so honored to uplift the voices and work of each of you, an amazing leader in your own right. We hope the experiences shared today help each of you in your own work. So please don't let the support end here. We encourage you to donate directly to the organizations you've learned about today. Their websites will be shared directly following the broadcast. You can also learn more about how to get involved by reaching out to info@nativegiving.org. If you haven't already done so, you should be, or if you haven't already received it, you should be receiving an email shortly with a link to a brief survey. Please take time to share your thoughts. It takes about 4 minutes, and it really helps us to improve these types of events. As a reminder, this session was open to the public as a highlight of our member benefits. If you are not a NAP member and want to learn more, please visit nativephilanthropy.org or email Rod Jacobs at rjacobs@nativephilanthropy.org. Thank you for joining, and we will see you next month. We'll see you next month for member education session, Two-Spirit and Indigenous LGBTQ experiences.